Next, we'll go into payment terms. Once again, a lot of this might be a little complicated right now. It's just to become more familiar with these terms. As you use them and as you meet people that use them, you'll become more familiar with them and more comfortable with them. So our first payment term is cash in advance. So this is exactly what it sounds like. The buyer will pay for the product before the product is even boarded on a ship. Now, this presents the highest risk to the buyer because the buyer is paying for a product without any assurance that the product will actually be shipped, will actually be delivered, or whether the product actually exists at all. Some deals are structured so that cash is paid in advance, but only a certain percentage, and then the rest of the payment is made through one of the other forms we will discuss. Now, cash in advance is really high risk to buyer, and so it is always best to avoid it, and most serious buyers avoid it entirely. Sellers, on the other hand, prefer it because it means they're assured their money before they even have to make any commitment to the buyer. Second is cash against documents. So the buyer will pay when presented with specific documents. For example, the buyer might want to pay when he's presented with a bill of lading, which, as we discussed earlier, is a receipt that indicates that the product was boarded on a ship and is ready to head out to the buyer. Now, this is much safer for the buyer than cash in advance, but at the same time, it is not entirely safe, it is not entirely foolproof. A scammer could still forge documents and get money for loading the product even if the product didn't really exist. Finally, we have the letter of credit. This is an arrangement using banks in which the buyer's bank guarantees payment to the seller's bank if particular documents are presented. So what this basically means is the buyer will inform his bank that he is looking for the following documents: a bill of lading, for example, an inspection certificate, a receipt, for example, and the bank of the buyer will guarantee payment to the seller's bank if those documents are presented. So it is no longer the buyer's responsibility to pay, it is the bank's responsibility to pay. And the seller is guaranteed his payment if he presents the required document to the bank. Now, this is by far the safest form of payment and it's preferred by serious buyers. And the reason this is the safest form of payment is the payment is already guaranteed by the buyer's bank. And so the buyer can no longer go back on his word or on his contract and not pay once the required documents have been presented. Many serious buyers will only use this method, and 99% of large companies will only use this method for payment. And it is usually a good sign that the buyer and the seller are not trying to scam one another when their only acceptable term of payment is LC, or letter of credit. Next is the pro forma invoice. This is an invoice that a seller provides a buyer with product and shipping details, including the description of the product, such as weight, price, port of origin, destination, before the sale. So this is not a legally binding document or invoice. This is presented from the seller to the buyer to show them approximately what the goods will cost, fitting the description and shipping terms required by the buyer. Next is the letter of intent, or LOI. This is a letter from the buyer stating that they intend to purchase particular goods. Once again, this is not a binding agreement. This is simply a buyer stating that they wish to purchase a particular set of goods from the seller, including descriptions such as the product, the weight, the price, the destination port, etc. Next, we have the purchase order. This is an official order for the purchase of specific goods by a buyer, including the product details, shipping arrangement, and is usually the first part of the actual purchase procedures. Now you'll notice this contains the same information as the pro forma invoice. The difference is the purchase order is a legal contract and is binding, and the buyer must follow through with the purchase of the goods that they've stated. Next is the commercial invoice. This is an official invoice for the sale of goods provided to the buyer after the sale has occurred. So once again, this is similar to the pro forma invoice in terms of its content, such as shipping detail, product description, weight, price, origin, etc. Except this is an official document, an official invoice issued after the sale has occurred, and is often required by customs for clearance to import into a country. Next is the price quote. A price quote is the price a company is willing to sell a particular quantity of a product, including the shipping and payment terms. So when a company states that they are willing to sell 1 ton of red lentils, CIF, New Jersey, that is a price quote, and it is issued to a buyer so that a buyer is aware of what price they are paying for particular goods. This is always subject to change due to political, environmental, agricultural, shipping, and other circumstances. For example, red lentils in Canada this winter were selling for approximately $800 per ton, $800 per ton, unshipped. However, rain before the harvest season started damaged a lot of the lentil supply, and so prices had increased to $850 per ton. So price quotes are always subject to change and are not binding. They are just a rough estimate of how much a product will cost, including its shipping and payment terms. Finally, we have the RFQ, which is a request for quote. So when a company is looking to purchase products, they are issuing an RFQ, a request for quote, and in turn, suppliers will give them a price quote for the requested goods and the shipping terms to complete a deal, and the buyer will select which quote is most suitable for them. Here's an example of a price quote. So on a website such as Alibaba, you might see something like RFQ 23 metric tons of crimson red lentils in 1 kilogram transparent bags, CIF, Alexandria, Egypt, LC only. So first of all, let's organize this. The product is crimson red lentils, and they want to purchase 23 metric tons. They want it in 1 kilogram clear packaging, CIF, meaning cost, insurance, and freight, to Alexandria, Egypt port, and their only acceptable payment method is an LC payment, or a letter of credit payment. So this is a typical request for quote example, and then based on these details, a supplier can give a price quote to the buyer with their goods and their offerings, and then the buyer can select the most appropriate supplier for themselves. And lastly, white label or private label. This term is a service from a supplier to place the buyer's logo and branding and custom packaging on their own product. So if a supplier provides diet pills, for example, white label or private label services means that they are willing to put your logo and your branding and your custom packaging on their own product so you can sell it as your own. Now, these are just some of the many terms you'll run into, but this basic guideline will really help you in establishing a simple understanding of the terms used in shipping and buying and providing price quotes, and will help you navigate the buyers and supplier markets on Alibaba and other services. Thank you.